let's bring in right now. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mika.
This is a president who's desperate to be impeached. He's desperate to turn the attention on him in the most chaotic way.
He loves playing the victim, and he has from the very beginning.
Let's bring in Senate Minority Leader, Democrat Chuck Schumer of New York, who was there. My gosh, what a production.
You know, Chuck, I'm sure you've seen a lot of plays by your children. You go there and you see them do, their holiday plays. I mean, this yesterday was far less convincing than anything I saw in a third grade holiday production.
Yeah, it's because they're so erratic. He's become an erratic, helter-skelter, get-nothing-done president. And you hit it, Joe. He doesn't have real accomplishments. The two things they look at are the tax bill, highly unpopular because it went to the very wealthy, and even the economy, most of the benefits are falling on the wealthy. And you ask average people 60% median, 60% above median income and lower, they don't think they're gaining. And the other claim to fame is the courts. And now people are seeing how radical and hard right these justices and judges they put in are. We've seen that with the issue of choice and abortion. Now that it's real that Roe v. Wade might be overturned or so greatly curtailed we won't recognize it, the American people don't like that either. So if he were smart, he'd sit down with us. We Democrats want to do infrastructure. We believe in infrastructure, not only roads and bridges and water and sewer, the traditional, but what about a power grid across the country that could bring clean energy in all different places? What about broadband to rural America and inner city America? Tens of millions of good, or 10 million good-paying jobs. So we want to do this, and he's incapable of it. What happened yesterday, in my judgment, is that they were so ill-prepared and afraid to actually say how they'd pay for infrastructure. They were unable, that they looked for a way to back out. And you may remember Tuesday night, they sent us a letter saying, let's do NAFTA before we do infrastructure. So that was their first gambit. Then they realized they had nothing to say on NAFTA. So I think probably early that morning, they concocted this, temper tantrum, and he walked out. But it doesn't look good for him to anyone but his hardcore base. And even some of them are going to start saying, he's not getting anything done. It's just a show.
We were in Washington working together in the House, and then you went over to the Senate during the Clinton era. And we fought like hell over Bill Clinton and perjury and all of these other issues. But in the middle of that, Republicans talked to Democrats. The Clinton administration, to their credit, continued talking to the chairmen and chairwomen in the House and the Senate. I mean, we got a hell of a lot of things done in the 1990s, even when it was politically fraught.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And, ultimately, what Donald Trump campaigned on and how he won the election, not popular vote, but electoral vote, is changing your lives, getting things done that make things better for you. And a lot of people now see, more and more people, that he's not getting anything done. And he doesn't realize what a liability that is. The presidency is not just a reality show. And if you don't get real things done for the American people, they're going to want change again, and they will want change away from Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So how can you trust Donald Trump ever again to sit down and do a deal with you? And I ask that question, let's look just at your interactions with him. The Senate, the House leaders all went over, and you talked about immigration a year ago. Donald Trump said to everybody around that table, said specifically to Dianne Feinstein when she asked him, he said, you guys come up with a deal, and if you come up with a deal, I'll approve it. You came up with a deal.
We did.
And then he did not approve it. He said the same thing on infrastructure. And then he pulled back. Every single deal that he offers and you all accept to create jobs in Youngstown, Ohio, to create jobs across the Midwest, to create jobs across Michigan, to create jobs across Wisconsin, to create jobs across Pennsylvania. Every time you try to do that with infrastructure, he throws a temper tantrum and basically says, the hell with Youngstown. The hell with Macomb County. The hell with Wisconsin. So how do you help those people in those states when the president won't let you?
Well, one, we have to keep trying. We went over there dubious that he'd actually present us with what we had asked, which is a way to pay for it. We assumed it wouldn't be a way we liked. You know, what we proposed is undoing some of these tax cuts on the wealthiest people to pay for it and create jobs for the middle class, as you say, throughout the Midwest and throughout America. But this administration, I mean, maybe all this show is a cover-up, quote unquote, that they can't get anything done. They have Mulvaney as chief of staff, and you knew him in the House. He is so hard right. He doesn't even think the federal government should put dollars into infrastructure or education or the traditional kind of things that average folks need. And there's no one else. There is no one home. The only people who were able to say, Mr. President, you got to do this better, you got to do this differently, are gone. The Mattises are gone, the Kellys are gone. Even Priebus tried a little bit. And so there's no one home. And that's why the next year and a half, if it's a do-nothing, helter-skelter, erratic presidency, which it is right now, it's going to inure to Donald Trump's detriment. And the hope here to get something done, if Trump, you know, when Trump really becomes unpopular, then our Republican colleagues in the Senate, which is the fulcrum here now that we have the House, realize that, and they push away from him. They're scared of him. They don't like to, but they did. Government shutdown, where Trump shut the government down against the advice of some of the senators. They had to pull him back in and break with him. And if this continues, and if he becomes so unable to get things done, they may realize their political fate is tied to his and start working with us, even when Trump will say no and pound the table and do all the other stuff he does.
Yeah, let's bring in right now Mike Barnicle, and maybe Mike will bring up the Yankees' incredible success despite their banged-up roster.
No, I'm going to skip over that, Joe. You know, I'm not.
There's no Aaron Judge in the White House.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, poor Senator Schumer.
There's no Aaron Judge on the Yankees either right now.
Plus, you're on the verge of could be a potentially disastrous New York Giants football season. I know. So we won't get into that.
Don't pain me.
Yeah, but Senator, yesterday you used a key word to describe the Trump presidency. A lot of people would agree with you. A show. It's a daily show. And yesterday's show didn't get the ratings that apparently the president thought it was going to get. But let me ask you, we're 2.5 years now into this experimental presidency. So what's your verdict? This is a simple question. Is he competent to do the job? Can he do the job?
No, he is not. And more people are seeing it. And I think the show, if you will, is to try to divert attention from that. But over a period of time, you know, you may enjoy the show the first few days you go, but if you have to sit there and watch it every day for 4 years or 2.5 years, you get tired of it. Especially when you're hurting, especially when you need health care, especially when you need a good paying job, especially when you're worried about the future of your kids, especially when you need, you know, broadband across the country, which a lot of people don't have in rural areas.
Senator Schumer, it's Jonathan Lemire. As much as yesterday was about the inability to strike any sort of infrastructure deal, the White House walking away from it, it's about the politics of it and people around the president. This is about impeachment. Now, that's obviously a process that starts in the other House of Congress, not yours. But it is one that will have an impact for you and for the electoral stakes, not just for the presidency in 2020, but the Senate. What do you, sir, think? Should Speaker Pelosi, should the House of Representatives, should they begin impeachment proceedings?
Look, I think what Speaker Pelosi is doing is, I don't want to demote her, what Speaker Pelosi is doing is exactly right. You know, in the day-to-day frustration at the president's lack of respect for rule of law, his bullying the process and his bullying people, we forget the wisdom, the beauty of the founding fathers, and they've always thought it would be a slow, inexorable process. It will be. We're not going to snap our fingers and all the documents will come out and everyone will testify, but there are the courts, and they haven't, because of the way the founding fathers set this up. The courts are slow, you know, they can appoint people, but still the majority of judges are not Trump appointees and not these hard right appointees that they have appointed. And you saw what happened this week, which I think added to Donald Trump's frustration. You had 2 court cases that said get right to the innards of what Donald Trump fears, the revelation of his finances and his dealings with banks and other things. That is going to continue to happen. More and more will come out, and then the public will make a decision as to should Trump stay in office, and that will be reflected particularly in the Senate, Republican controlled. So Pelosi is doing this exactly right, and I think what people miss is she does have the support. She told me, I was with her right after the meeting, with the House at 9 a.m., which Trump at our meeting said was pre-planned, to have that meeting because of the infrastructure meeting. That's bunk. But in any case, most of the caucus is willing to go with her. They defer to her wisdom, her knowledge, and her strength, that she won't be pushed around. And so I think she has the support of most of us, and certainly me.
Well, Senator, you mentioned the founders and Speaker Pelosi when I interviewed her this week. I just asked her point blank, right out on the balcony, are we going to be okay? And she said yes.
Yes,
because of our founders. Because of our founders. And I was like, okay, thank God. The great Casey Hunt has a question for you. Casey.
Yeah, just one point to that, Mika, before Casey.
Yeah.
The process is deep and strong, but slow moving. And that's how they wanted it, and that's how it is. But it's worked pretty well for 220 years, and I don't think someone like Donald Trump is going to be able ultimately to upend it as long as the American people continue to stay, don't become just apathetic and who cares what happens.
Exactly. Casey.
Senator, great to see you this morning. I mean,
hi, Casey.
My question for you is pretty simple. I mean, you went over the White House. We've heard from your colleagues. It was clear the president wasn't going to sit down at the meeting. You guys are all ready to do that. Would you go back to the White House at his invitation?
You always got to try, even though, as Joe mentioned,
even if he's using you guys in a show, as you call it?
I don't think it works for him. I say yesterday we came out a lot better than he did. And as I said, I think the show wears thin. I think the lack of accomplishment, the do-nothing presidency sinks in. That's going to be the number. All the things people don't like about Donald Trump, his bullying, his ego, his dishonesty, ultimately they want the president to get something done. And when he can't get anything done, or the only things he gets done don't benefit them and cut against them, that's the #1 strike against the president, and a #2 and a #3. And that is sinking in. So what he does here doesn't help the country or him. But we Democrats, in answer to your question, will keep trying. I believe in infrastructure. The president called me a week after the election, when I was still in a state of shock, like so many others. What can we do together? I remember I was actually driving in my car going past the Trump golf course in the Bronx, and I told him no one was there. But in any case, no one was golfing at that course. It's not a big winner, that course. Giuliani gave him the land. It should have been used for housing or something. That's a local New York thing. But in any case, I said, let's do infrastructure. Mr. President, you said, yes, I want to do infrastructure. I said, Mr. President, I told him even then, you're going to have to tell the hard right they're going to have to put real money into infrastructure. You've embraced the hard right towards the end of your campaign, even though you didn't originally campaign that way. And he said, we'll do it. We care about infrastructure. It's one of the top things we can get done. We always used to get it done in a bipartisan way. And maybe, our Republican friends will realize now that you can't do it with Trump. Let's do it together and dare him to veto something, which I don't think he would at the end of the day.
There you go.
So, Senator, you reminded me of something when you you talked about Donald Trump and dealing with him. I always have people ask me, and Al Sharpton does as well, what was this guy like before he got into politics? And I try to explain how different he was than what he is now. This guy contributed to you through fundraisers for you. I mean, he can't hide it. He really likes you. He really likes Nancy Pelosi. He's more comfortable with you all personally and culturally than Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and all those guys. He's got no use for them. And what he used to say about right-wing Republicans behind closed doors, nobody would believe today. So how do you explain to people watching this morning the transformation of the Donald Trump that you knew, even though we knew he was a bully and he had his weaknesses, but just the radical differences between who he was and the character, this abhorrent character he's playing on TV.
Well, I would say this, Joe. You're right in one sense, but not in the other. His personality hasn't changed much. He's always been a bully. He's always threatened. He's always sued. He's always misstated stuff. And he always had a way of appealing to sort of the dark side of people, even when he was just a public figure, you know, getting stories in the New York Post and things like that. What's changed is his politics, and that's because he has no principles. He has no deep beliefs. Maybe the one that he does is on going after China, a rare moment where I agree with him and think we have to be really tough on China. But on almost everything, he said he was pro-choice. Okay? He's doing everything he can to dismantle Roe v. Wade because he thinks it's politically expedient. And what he did, he ran, I told him this in that same conversation driving by his golf course. I said, Mr. President, when Mr. President-elect he was, then you ran as a populist against both the Democratic and Republican establishments. If you govern that way, there'll be things we can work with you on. We're not going to abandon our principles, but we can work together, infrastructure being one of them. But if you embrace the hard right, you're going to get nothing done, because not only America is far from the hard right, but so even is the mainstream of the Republican Party. And, you know, they've tried to hide it or cover it up. Now he does all this showy stuff. That's what he's done to try and cover it up. But it just won't work. But what's changed are his politics, his views, which he never held deeply on just about anything. It's all about him and his ego and what he thinks works at the moment. One of his biggest problems is he is so erratic, he is so short-term, that from one moment to the next, he just, you know, zips from one thing to the other, and it's not working. It's not working for him.
Not working at all. All right. Senator Chuck Schumer, as always, it's great to have you on.
Senator.
Thanks for being on, and thanks for watching.
Yeah, 10-6, Barnacle. Giants will be 10-6.
No, you're dreaming. You're dreaming. Stick with Trump.
I'm an optimist on everything.
All right. And the Knicks are going to win the NBA championship next year. All right.
I'm not that much of a dreamer.
Okay, very good. Senator Chuck Schumer, thank you so much. We will be back with more Morning Joe. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.